Hello, my name's Chris from Riverhorse, and today I'm going to be interviewing the artist and illustrator Tony Fleecs, who is the cover artist for the majority of our adventures. Hello, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, great.
Good.
Um, so, I'm just going to dive straight in with a
All right.
bunch of questions. Um, the first one we've asked to all of our interviewees. Do you play any tabletop role-playing games?
I do not. I don't play any. I just mainly work nowadays. Like my favorite thing is to draw. Like when I was a kid, I would draw, and now I get to draw for a job. And so all the other stuff that I used to do to fill time with, I just draw now instead of doing that. So it's on the one hand, it's like the greatest, and on the other hand, I'm just like, I don't do anything else. I should do something else. So like, I don't play video games anymore. I don't play tabletop games. My wife has a regular D&D game, and sometimes she plays Call of Cthulhu, and sometimes they modify it and switch it up to different things. But she plays at a tiki bar every Thursday, and she has one tiki drink, uh, and then she, plays D&D.
So when did you kind of start being interested in the My Little Pony, you know, universe?
So I was aware of My Little Pony always. I grew up in the 80s. I have sisters who also grew up in the 80s, and so they were into it back then, like the original first generation, second generation. And then when the generation 4 that we're in now, came about, I was aware of it sort of tangentially. Like I saw it was happening. I saw it look cool now. Like I think the design of these ponies now is the coolest they've ever looked. So I just saw like, oh, they redesigned that and it looks cool. And I saw an episode like in a hotel, but I wasn't really aware of it until 2012, which is a couple years after this new generation started. I got hired to draw it. And it started out slowly. It just started out like, here, would you like to draw a cover? Or, hey, we got another cover for you. And then that sort of started the ball rolling until it was this avalanche of like, oh, we need all kinds of stuff, because the comics that I draw were very successful out of the gate. So we just had a ton of work to do right away. So since 2012, I've pretty much been full-time drawing the ponies. And then when I first started working on it was when I was like, oh, I should watch this thing. And I was terrified because like I'd seen what it looked like, but I didn't know what it was. And so it looked like a kid's cartoon. And so I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to watch this Dora the Explorer,
Yeah.
just like super childish, kid stuff. And I was very pleasantly surprised that it was as charming as it is, and as watchable. Because then it didn't seem like, I'd have watched it either way because it's my job, but it didn't seem like work. It seemed like more like, oh, I'll get a break. I'll watch a couple episodes of Ponies, and
So when did you start out on your path to becoming an illustrator?
always. I was the oldest child of 5 children, and I was about 4 years different from my next sibling. So for a little while, I was like an only child, and I was sort of on my own. And then by the time my sisters came along, I was sort of left on, like, it's not like they abandoned me, but I sort of had to make my own fun. So I would always draw, and if I would go someplace and they had to deal with the other kids, I would just sort of find a notebook or find, I could sit around and sketch. And I guess as soon as I realized that people drew for a living, I was like, well, then that's what I'll do. And it's been weird. I just turned 40, and I've only ever wanted to do this one thing, and I only ever knew that this is what I wanted to do. I mean, for a while I thought about animation, but definitely it was always drawing something. So yeah, I started, when I was like, 3 or 4 years old, I started drawing, and I just sort of been doing it ever since. I went to art school, but even before that, I went, like my parents were very encouraging. My dad is a teacher, and they were always just like, whatever you guys are into, we're encouraging of that. And it was it worked out real well for me, because they were just like, oh, you want to be a cartoonist or an artist. So if classes come along, they're like extracurricular. In my town, we had like a cartooning school. And so they were just like, oh, you can go take classes there. And so I had that to do, and like there would be seminars, and they were just always sort of like on the lookout for me to be able to do whatever. So by the time I got out of high school, I went to I'd spent like the last year in high school, I got all my required classes out of the way, and I would just be in art class from like 5 periods a day. So like 5 hours of my day at school, I would just be in like studio art class, just drawing. And then by the time I got out, I went right to art school, and I sort of knew from there, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And so I've just sort of always been stubbornly just pointed in this direction.
So what inspires you?
I still love, I mean, so for you guys, I do covers. The main part of my job is comics and stories. And I still love stories and comics. And I love, like, there's artists that I look at and I'm just like, oh man, they got it figured out. They got it dialed in. So I do a lot of, like sort of downloading, like I read books constantly, and I go to the movies once a week to just sort of like always have, input. I don't know specifically what inspires me. It's all like when I say like what my influences are and people that I look to, it's never what you would expect based on what my artwork looks like. Like my stuff is pretty cartoony, and my aesthetic it looks pretty simple, but I'm trying to do something with it, like I'm trying to have the deceptively simple, like I want to be able to sneak emotion into places and sort of like have something be more complex than just to look at first glance. But like I love, like one of my favorite artists is Bill Sienkiewicz. He's a illustrator. He drew comics. He still draws comics, but he's also done like album covers and movie posters and stuff. And he does this sort of like wild, sort of like Bob Peaky, designy artwork, but he also can tell like a super deft story, like where it just like small moves and small details change, and you're just like, oh, this guy really is like into the nitty gritty of it. And then I like people. There's this guy named Terry Moore who writes and draws his own stuff. He did this book called Strangers in Paradise in the 90s, and he's sort of been his own industry for like 25 years, just making his own thing. And he just tells these stories that are about people. These sort of like black and white comics about people, and sometimes they'll be like people in a sci-fi adventure or people in a horror adventure, but mostly it's just about like the relationships that they have. And yeah. That's cool. But also, like I'm like I said, I'm 40, so that means in the 90s I was a teenager, and in the 90s comic books were tailor-made for teenage boys. Like they were just like muscles and guns and like sexy ladies, and just like super extreme and explosive and everything. It was just like to think back on it, it just seems like something was exploding in your face every time you picked up a comic book. The people who made Marvel comics all split and started Image Comics, and then they just made like these pure id testosterone comics that if you just happen to be a 14-year-old boy at the time, it's just like, what is happening, and so all that stuff sort of worked its way into my stuff. A lot of times, like the stuff I do for you guys, sometimes I'll do these ponies that are just like super action packed, and I feel like I'm just sort of channeling that vibe through my aesthetic into this thing.
Well, I think that's a pretty good segue to I wanted to just go through the covers and kind of talk about them one by one. I am going to have them kind of digitally appear on the screen, but I do also have them physically here. So I think the earliest one is Festival of Lights.
Yes, that was the first one I did.
Which is a very D&D themed kind of cover, a classical adventure into the Underdark. So is this your first time drawing these three ponies?
Yeah, so my friend Amy, I guess she designed them the first time around, or she did the first round of covers for you guys. She did 3 of them. And then she moved on and was working more on Disney princesses. And so she passed my info to you guys. And so she was like, hey, these guys are going to call you and they want you to do this thing. And so when I first did that cover, the Festival of Lights, that was my first one doing that. And also, though, Amy's like one of my favorite pony artists, one of my favorite artists all around. And so it wasn't just like, hey, can you draw a pony cover? Because I could do that, like, no problem. But they're like, you do a pony cover like Amy does it. And I was just like, oh, no. So she does this sort of like cool storybook style, no lines, super rendered, like the stuff that I do for you guys. And she sort of, I bet she can just knock those out, no problem. But whenever I have to like do what Amy does, it takes me so much longer. Like it's such a, it's so laborious because it's just like, all right, we'll take these lines out. She probably doesn't even put lines in the first place. But when you look at these covers versus like the comic book covers that I do, or like the book covers, they're different. Like the style is different, and that's because she set the she set the tone, yeah. And then I'm just sort of like carrying on with it. This is how these ponies look, and so when I draw them, they have to look that way. So so they take me a long time to do. But that one, it was the first one I did, and for the first 3 or 4 of them, no, for the first 3 at least, you guys would send these little pencil sketches, which were very like sort of sloppy, but just like gave me enough of the idea, like, oh, they just want the pretty version of this. And that I always, some people feel constrained by that, but I love it because it's just like, oh, that part's done. The thumbnail stage is done. So now I just have to figure out how to make this look nicer. And that's sort of like there's like the thoughtful, like the crunch time where like your brain has to really get into something and think about it, part of the work. And then there's the sort of like autopilot where you're just like, all right, well, let's just do this. And with these covers, a lot of the time I was just going on autopilot, which is great because it's just like, oh, just make it look nice. So that's what I did on a lot of them. But on that one, I remember it was my first time doing that style and just sort of like learning the tricks of it. Like I drew a lot of detail on the line art. And then when I delete all the line art, there would be texture because like if you look at the rocks on the ground, they're all sort of different colors and shapes and stuff. And it's because I drew all these super intricate little tiny shapes. And then I have a lady named Lauren who does all my flat colors. And so she goes in and she, like a coloring book, like colors in all the flats. And then I go through and put the specific colors on top. So in this case, I just was able to take off my lines and just show the flats, and it already had like a texture and a detail to it. And then that's something that I've just kept doing since then, my regular work, where I'll just be like, oh, I can just put a lot of detail in the lines here and then get rid of the lines, and it'll have like an interesting textured look in the background. So that's what I did on that one. This one has a lot of books on it.
A lot of books in it, a lot of books on it. Like it's a very book-heavy book.
Yeah.
I think this one is my favourite, bar
awesome.
The most recent one that we don't know whether or not we're able to talk about. But,
okay.
Tell us about the cover of Judge Not by the Cover.
So that one, I always tell people that like the 7th pony is bookshelves. Like the main part of my job drawing My Little Pony is drawing bookshelves, books on them. Because like Twilight Sparkle in the show lived in a library at the start, and now she has a castle with an even bigger library in it. Oftentimes they'll go to other libraries. Like it's just so many bookshelves. And so this one, when I got the little sketch of it, and they were like, "It's just a room full of books," and I was like, "Oh, of course it is."
And the books
but
are flying,
I sort of took it upon myself to do the ultimate room full of books. Just like. Because I myself have a room full of books. Like I have my own library, not with a ladder. That's the dream. Right now, it just has bookshelves in it.
Ladder and a secret door. Those are the two things a library needs. Yeah,
for sure. I'm gonna go ladder first. I don't think either of them are gonna fit in this current library, but I'm starting with a ladder. But yeah, that one was definitely just like, let me get all my bookshelf yayas out right here. And I drew so many books. And then the designs that you guys sent me for the characters, the book characters, I had fun sort of like pushing them because a lot of times in ponies, your job is to take something and then push it so that it has character or emotion. You know, like there's a character. Sometimes there will be characters who talk to rocks, and you have to show the rock. And in the show, the rock doesn't move, and it's funny because everything else moves. But in a comic book or illustration, the rock doesn't move, and nothing else moves either. So you have to draw it with some sort of life to it, so that it gives you the same sort of vibe that you would get in the show. So in this case, it was just taking those books and sort of filling them up with character, the bad one and the good one.
And then the hidden Discord in the back.
Oh yeah. How did he? I feel like he is in there pretty well still. I remember because I designed the text on that one too, and it was like trying to make sure that he would still read with the words back there. But yeah, I feel like if you're paying attention, you could see Discord back there.
Yeah. After that, we have the Haunting of Equestria.
Yeah.
A spooky time. Now I found this cover was super rewarding because I actually drew the two ponies that.
The designs that I saw.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And I think it's so cool to like get something back that's like so amazing and being like, oh man, look, that like he's kept these details that I put in. Like
yeah.
Like,
now, what did I not do? Like, what did I leave out that you're like, how could he? Like, did you see anything that I did wrong that you would have fixed? Because I remember I did switch a couple things. Yes.
She's wearing little army boots in the one I drew. But
that's what it was. I couldn't figure out how to make it look sleek in that flying pose. I did remember changing it. I was like, I hope the people who designed this don't care. Little did I know.
No, I think it's super rad.
Yeah, I love that one. One of my favorite ones for sure. Just like when you guys wrote and were like, oh, so we're doing alternate universe versions of Luna and Celestia, and here's what they look like, and I was just like, oh wow, they look so different. So like being able to sort of do like the cover image, like the definitive take of like what that world's Princess Luna looks like. That red Luna is super cool. I hope, like, I feel like I could just draw her into other things. Am I allowed to draw her into the comics? None of us own her.
I think it belongs to Hasbro.
Yeah, I'm gonna start throwing her into things.
Yeah, like I thought it was. I think the solid Snake take on Celestia is so badass. Taking something that's pink and sparkles and turning it into this.
Yeah, what must she have been through that turned her from the one we knew into like in this world she looks like this?
Yeah, and again, like I love how they all just kind of they capture this little moment, like the that moment of the three ponies looking through the mirror and seeing these two characters that they must know from their own worlds fighting, and just their reaction being like, you know, how did they get here?
Yeah, that's sort of like a big part of my job. When they want me to do story specific stuff, or when you guys want me to do story specific stuff, is taking the idea of the thing and figuring out what the iconic image is that sort of says like this is what this is about. And sometimes in comic book covers, they'll just be like, oh, just give us something with the ponies being cute, and it won't have anything to do with the story. And so then after 7 years, it's just like, oh, geez, what am I going to do with them being cute this time? So now, like, when it's something like this where it's very specific, it's like, here's what it is, here's what characters are in it, then I can just sort of go like, oh, what would be the moment that would sell that world and that idea? And I feel like that came through pretty well on that one.
Yeah, we've got Philly-Sized Follies, which is a different take, because it's the book itself is an anthology of 3 very different adventures. So yeah, we've came up with this way of trying to cram them all onto the front cover, which I think is very artful.
Yeah, I was happy with that one too. That one was, I had just seen Into the Spider-Verse right when I started working on that, and it was a similar it was sort of a similar idea, that it's like these take these different things and make them work in this one thing. So the idea of having it be like a pulp or a comic book where they all were presented in that thing, and then our heroes are standing on top of it. Like the ponies on the cover exist in the real world, and then the stories that they're in are inside this book, and sort of like drawing them three-dimensionally and then drawing the stuff in the background flat, but then having that still the perspective work that they're still in the story that they're standing on top of. It was a little bit tricky, but I think we pulled it off.
They really pop, and I think that one of the reasons they pop is because, like you were saying, that there's this tone that Amy set.
Yeah.
But the comic they're on doesn't fit that tone, which I think is a really nice kind of touch.
Yeah. Also, it gave me a bit of a break. I didn't have to do the Amy thing for the background, so I just the background was just the easy way, and then the ponies were in the more complicated Amy Meberson style. But yeah, I think that one came out real good. I think it's effective. Like, it tells you exactly what it is when you look at it.
Melody of the Waves, which I don't have a printed copy of, but you very recently sent the finished cover to me, and it's rad.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this one, you guys, did you design the Kraken?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. I got that design, and I was just like, oh, wow, cool. I was so excited to sort of see, what the Kraken would look like in My Little Pony verse. And I think you had even asked originally if I wanted to do it, and I was just like, I don't even know what I would do. So I sort of put the work on you guys to thank you for taking that part of it away from me.
It's a good example of what I was saying before we started the interview about trying to find that niche where it's scary and cutesy, and it's
Yeah, for sure. People will probably be seeing it while we're talking about it, but the Kraken has these very adorable, like, Rarity style eyeballs with these eyelashes, and so it sort of fits. It pops it right into the universe, but also, like, the scenario that I set him in is hopefully scary enough that it's like, oh, this is a real threat. I love doing this one, just because it feels sort of like, like old, like maritime paintings, like just a painting of a boat in a choppy sea, and sort of.
It really captures, like, the pinnacle of that nautical adventure. Like, I think the spirit of the entire book is there, and I love the idea that a dungeon master is going to be running this book, and the book is set at sea. There's a big ocean, and you sail around and sort of find islands and uncover treasures and things. But I love the idea that the players are going to be on the sea 99% of the game, and they're going to see the cover of this book and no other information. And the cover of this book is just this terrifying, like, moment of the sea turning against you. Which I just think is a really good way to put the fear in some players.
I'm glad you didn't put that pressure on me before I did this. I would have been a lot more. I would have taken a lot more time to figure it out. This one, it was definitely like, it took me a little bit to figure out, because this one you guys didn't send a thumbnail. It was just sort of like, if it was the Kraken and the ponies, and I was like, okay. So this one took a little while to figure out, but once I sort of got the idea that each of the ponies would be like doing a different, like having a different reaction to what was going on. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, this will be cool. And then I just, I sort of referenced like old paintings of seascapes and stormy seas and stuff, and sort of pulled colors from those just to sort of put it in that vein. I'm always looking up like paintings or images of sunsets, images of skies to sort of pull colors off of, and I feel like it sort of pays off because there's a palette that the show has set that is like the way skies look in ponies, but you can push it so far just by going like, well, what if it was sunset, or what if it was just right before dawn? What if I took those colors? And so I did that on this, And then on the waves, I knew I just wanted to draw a ton of waves. And I did that same thing I was talking about earlier, where I just drew a ton of detail in the lines, and then I had my flatter put the flat colors in, and then I can just take all the lines out, and then it sort of plays as like it looks like water. And anytime I draw waves like that, I'm always looking at that shot from The Little Mermaid where she jumps up onto the rock, because that's like the greatest waves that's ever been drawn. So I'm always like pulling up images of that and just doing my take on those waves. Yeah. I mean, yeah, those waves are amazing. They really, I mean, I can't imagine they're going to get waves better than that in the live action one. Fingers crossed. I'm pulling for them.
Yeah, so I think, like, I know you said at the start that switch back. That Amy originally designed these three characters. Who, for us, they're I don't know how familiar you are with a game called Pathfinder. Pathfinder have a thing called the Archetypes, and the Archetypes are kind of their example heroes that are always on their covers and always sort of, and these characters are kind of, they're never in world, they're never in the adventure, but they're always on the covers, and they and that's kind of what these were for us. Was, you know, these are our three archetypes of the three kinds of adventurers that we imagine people putting together.
Right.
And I think whilst she decided how they look, like, I think across all of the covers you get a really good idea of those characters. Like, if you were to watch you know, an episode of Tails of Equestria, it would, you kind of already know who these ponies are, which I think is a really interesting kind of consistency across all of the covers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I took that from hers. Like, I still will bring those up sometimes when I get a new one of these assignments and sort of do like my cursory glance at, like, just like, well, okay, these are the, you know, like, I have to sort of remind myself, because I know the show ponies so well from just being immersed for so long. And these ones I'm always like, okay, well, they got the Strong Oak, is that his name?
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, like, he's
we'll
sort
cut
of
the relief out in the edit.
like, he's brave and brash and sort of like he's the one, like, she did the one where there's like the hawk chasing him over the, like, he's like trying to climb up a cliff and there's that hawk coming down on him, and like, he's scared in that one, but still, like, he's put himself in that situation, so you knew that, like, just the moment before that was him being real brave. So I try to make him, you know, like, sort of brave, but I also like the idea that he can immediately be on his heels. And then the other ones, like, there are archetypes within the ponies too, where, like, this one is your Pinkie Pie type, you know, like, she's super fun and she's excited about stuff, but she also has like she has like a bit of rarity to her, and that she's glamorous, and, you know, and then your adventurous one is sort of Rainbow Dashy, she's Pegasus, and she's sort of like, you know, puts her head down and gets stuff done. That's sort of how I imagine them when I'm drawing them.
No, I think it's like it's lovely that they have this life.
Yeah, I like it too. I mean, the other option then would be to just draw them as ciphers, you know, and then I feel like that's not as much fun for the people looking at it, or for me to draw, where it's just like, here's a Pegasus and here's a unicorn and they're, you know, on an adventure. But so if I can put a little bit of pathos, attention, or whatever, you know, like some sort of, if I feel like I know what they're thinking about, then I can sort of translate that onto the page. That's a big part of my job.
So that lines up super nicely with my next question, which was, do you have any tips for creating your own characters?
Yeah. I mean, so many people that are in the fandom, like in the pony fandom, have, like, it's part of their deal is that they have their own characters, you know, like, they all have an original character, and they have such a life and stuff. And I'm always fascinated by, like, how they got to, you know, like, how it came together, because mine, like, I have a pony character myself. As somebody else, a friend of mine, designed it before we were even friends. Like, when you go to these pony conventions, they'll announce you, and they'll be like, they'll have a picture of you as a pony, just going like, oh, Tony Fleecs is going to be at this convention, and here's a picture of me as a pony. The first time I saw that.
Can you share that with us so I can put it on screen?
Yes. Hold on a second.
Physically
It's up
in
on my
the
wall.
office.
Yeah, this is Tony Fleecs.
Oh
This
man.
is like a wood carving that this guy named Ed made. But my friend Trish designed the character originally. Yeah, and it just looks like me except thinner and has no gray hair yet. So, but yeah, so like when I think about my character, I think about just like a caricature of me almost. And so many people go the opposite, where their character is like the opposite of them. You know, like they're sort of like this quiet, reserved person. And their character is like a total maniac, like super party.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, yeah. Do I have any advice? I mean, I guess that would be my advice: is don't feel constrained to be inside of your own box. You know, like your character can be any kind of thing. Um, although don't go too crazy. It doesn't have to be like an alicorn princess. Like, let's be reasonable here. There can only be so many alicorn princesses. If you feel like you're that special that you have to be that, then really have your story back it up.
Okay.
You really have to bring it.
So, what kind of things would you like to see in the Tails of Equestria game in the future, moving forwards?
Well, we haven't. I mean, they haven't gone to outer space yet. I would love to do like sort of like a wintry adventure. Those two would be very easy to draw because snow is easy and space is easy, but that's not why I'm suggesting them. Just because I like
So
that
all
aesthetic.
white or all black.
Yeah, exactly. I just did a Star Wars comic that was about Tauntauns on Hoth, and so I got to do all this snowy, all these snowy backdrops, and sort of like I got to have a lot of fun with because you can't just do it all white, or it just looks like you didn't do anything. So you have to figure out ways to do like what your snowdrifts look like, or and then how do those ponies who are so colorful, how do they bounce off of like a snowy, like white or gray backdrop? And then space, it's kind of tricky because they don't have like astronauts or spaceships in ponies, and so you couldn't do like the sort of pulp, like bubble helmets or jetpacks thing. We sort of toyed with that a little bit in some like variant covers in ponies, but they don't. I mean, they didn't have the space race. There's no Sputnik in ponies. And their technology tends to be sort of like pre-industrial revolution. So like,
Yeah, I guess you could go.
you have to figure out some other way to get them.
Early kind of Jules Verne, H.G. Wells with it. Like,
Yeah.
I can't remember who wrote the. There's a very early science fiction story about these scientists who go to the moon by building an orb that can block gravity. So they think that gravity is like a wave, and so they build an orb that can shield gravity on the bottom, and because gravity can't get through the bottom of the orb, it moves upwards.
Ah, that's great.
It's like pushed by these waves. I don't know, but it really showcases a kind of like a science fiction eye view of something that wasn't understood in I think early Victorian times.
I mean, they did the same thing in that's what Explorers was too. Do you remember that movie, the Joe Dante movie, the kids that build a gravity ball that then they put
Explorers.
they put inside that like that tilt-a-whirl thing, and then that shoots them off into space. I love that movie so much, and except I hate the aliens in it.
I remember little puppet things. Yeah,
like they watch TV, and so like you went through all this great adventure, and then like the payoff at the end is just like a bunch of pop culture. It's like the teenage alien that they meet is just also a teenager, which was cool, but then he just like loved rock and roll music too, and I was just like, all right, come on. Even as a child, I was like, this is a bridge too far.
Well, that's all of my questions that I have written down.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks very much for not only for all of our amazing covers, but for taking the time to do an interview at 3 a.m.
It is 3:28 now. Yeah, but for me, that's sort of like the middle of my working day. Not all the time, but right now certainly, because I'm at the end of a deadline. So I'll just be here until this thing is done. But you guys are getting me at my prime. I'm really alert right now and ready to have this conversation. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that was excellent talking to you. Thank you so much for hiring me to do these. I love working on these books. So hopefully you guys make a ton more of them because I like drawing these characters.
Yeah, hopefully. We'll see what Gen 5 brings.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching our video. If you'd like to learn more, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. You can also like and subscribe to be told when we've released new videos.